Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Daniel Garcia, and I'm a teacher here at the Faculty of Education. I'm here to welcome and present our honored speaker, Professor Juan Carlos Revilla from the Department of Social Anthropology and Social Psychology here at the UCM. He's a consolidated researcher in the areas of youth studies, social movements, identity and subjectivities, and critical studies of work and organizations. Among other projects, he has been national coordinator of 2 European projects of the 7th Framework Program of the European Union. He's director of the research group Social Psychology, Inequalities, Gender and Violence, a member of the Transoc Institute here at UCM too, and of the Spanish Network of Youth Studies, and he has taught qualitative methodology for more than 10 years, especially in the use of Atlas T, in different master degrees and courses. Before the professor starts speaking, I would like to introduce the structure of the session. Juan Carlos will talk for around 45-50 minutes, and then we will have 15-10 minutes for discussion. And after that, as Monica has said, we have the flamenco performance, so please don't go far away. The flamenco will start like 10 minutes, 15 after we finish the conference, and it will last around 35 minutes, more or less. But we think it's really worth it, and it's, it's an important part of the Spanish culture, so we encourage you to come. So, Professor, when you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, hello to you all. I would like to start expressing my gratitude to the organizing team of the Congress for inviting me to give this conference. It is such an honor to take part here in this World Congress of Qualitative Research. I also want to thank the local organizing committee in the School of Education at the Complutense University, and especially to Monica Fontana and Celia Camilli for thinking of me for this role at the Congress. I would also like to thank you for attending the conference and to welcome you to my city and my university. I hope you will have a wonderful time here, even though the weather is quite cold these days. The aim of my presentation is to share with you my vision of the process of qualitative research under the understanding that it is better be mediated by computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, also known as CACDAS, and from now on it will be CACDAS. And I will provide a framework of the elements that should be intertwined and reflexively revisited during the time of development of the research project. For that, I draw on the notion of the magic square, as I will emphasize how these four elements need to be part of this process of reflexive interrelation. Qualitative research specialists usually stress the importance of adjusting research objectives and the theoretical framework. However, it is less common or quite uncommon to make such an assumption in relation to the link between theory and type of analysis, and between type of analysis and how to work with the empirical materials gathered for the research project. The aim of this contribution is to vindicate and explore such links. More than advocating for some theoretical approaches or analytical school, I stress the need to determine the theory and the analytical school that suits the kind of objectives one fixed for the project. Here you have these four elements that are usually thought as parts of a research project, as represented in the top left corner of the slide. It should start by determining the research objectives, then a theoretical and conceptual framework must be established. following a revision of the relevant scientific literature. Later, the methodological approach and the type of analysis are determined. And finally, the empirical materials gathered are put through some type of treatment, thereby the results are obtained. However, I think it is better to understand the whole process as a series of moves to and fro, forward, but also backwards. That is the reason I represent the ensemble of the square, in order to stress the mutual relationships among the four elements. For instance, academics, once trained and when they have gained some experience, normally specialize in a specific form of analysis and subsequently adapt their theories and research objectives to this theory or to this line of thinking. In a different direction, one of the marvels of qualitative research is how one can discover, quotation marks, some aspects of social reality or some discourses that were somehow unexpected. This can have the capacity of opening a different or new line of research that can lead to new or revised research objectives. For this reason, I think it is worth taking some time to explore the links among the four elements. But before that, and in order for you to understand my position as a researcher, I'd rather briefly share with you my background and my experience as a qualitative researcher, but also as a qualitative research teacher. I started as a young researcher back in the 1990s, when qualitative software was not really an option for research. Thus, I learned to analyze rather artisan-like, let's say, like that. During my training years, I remember transcribing interviews, typing, or even in handwriting. Later, we used the first word processor that really is the task of analyzing and revising texts. I don't want you to bore you with details, but the main point is that I and we learned at the time to analyze qualitative material manually, so to speak, and it was later when the first version of Cactus came into existence. But how did I develop my way of analyzing? In truth, I did not embrace a tailor-made method of analysis, but tried to develop my own way of doing qualitative research. And how I did do that and with what background? I must share with you that symbolic interactionism was, and somehow it still is quite strong in the Department of Social Psychology, where I studied and work now. It was a rather qualitative symbolic interactionism, so to speak. I mean, we definitely give the utmost importance to the subjective construction of meaning in social interaction. This was somehow a way out of grounded theory, and this was thought at the time. But at the time, we also paid much attention to then new forms of discourse analysis, those developed in social psychology in the UK, but also the more continental critical discourse analysis. The foundation of these schools of analysis were quite different from our dear symbolic interactionism, but still we found some points in common, and I tried to make them compatible for analysis, for instance, in my PhD dissertation. Finally, as a third influence, in this Complutense University, in my School of Political Sciences and Sociology, we have our own well-established form of discourse analysis that some call the Discourse Analysis School of Madrid in its own right. Logically, it has a different way of analyzing with its own tradition and practices, and it certainly had an influence in my way of doing qualitative research. As a consequence, when Cactus arrived, and I was already a trained qualitative researcher with his own approach to analyzing qualitative materials. However, when we encountered Cactus, I felt that the tools it offered could be of service for qualitative research. The question was then clear. Should I change my way of analyzing to use Cactus in a certain way, or should I use it in a way compatible or adapted to my ways of researching? Without giving many details about my way of doing qualitative analysis, I rapidly appreciated that the tool for organizing fragments of text and the possibility of making annotation and memos could be easily used or adapted to my ways of doing. And thus, I started using Cactus like 20 years ago. Atlas TI-5 was the first version I have memories of. Later in my career, I had the opportunity to teach Cactus, first to master's degree students in the Master of Methodology for Social Sciences here at Complutense, and later in the Master in Social Psychology. My audience from the start was quite varied. Most of the students came from sociology degrees, but also from political sciences, psychology, social work, anthropology, etc. And many came from outside Spain, mainly from Latin America. I first understood that it did not make sense teaching a concrete way of analysis to such a varied audience that would be logically my own way of analyzing. Thus, in the same way that I had developed my own way of analyzing, my students should have the opportunity to do as much. How could I impose a way of doing when they came from different universities and countries, had different backgrounds, and were acquainted with different theoretical traditions? This first realization was confirmed when I later did some training in Cactus for postgraduate researchers, scholars, all of them well-trained researchers that were interested in the possibilities of the software for their own research practices. It was most clear in these specific courses that my public was not expecting me to train them in qualitative research, only how the software could be of service for them, how they could adapt the software to their practice. Furthermore, some of these colleagues came to the course with a clear reluctance to use Cactus. They had the notion that this kind of software imposed a determined procedure for analysis that were at odds with their own ways. And in this sense, it was sometimes something strange for them and their expertise as expert qualitative researchers. Most probably, many publications about how to do qualitative research through Cactus may have contributed to this notion. Still, I thought then and still think that Cactus is no more than a set of tools adaptable to different uses, that is, different form of analyzing. For that, one must simply adapt the software tools to their practice of qualitative research. Let's go back then to the magic square, where the four elements and how they are interrelated are shown. If I said it before, I want to persuade you about the interest of this understanding of the research process, I should be able to develop an argumentation about how each of them are interrelated with one another. This would mean 6 possible combinations about the 4 elements. However, for this presentation, I will move rapidly with the interrelations related to the objectives and focus on the mutual relation among the other 3 elements: theory, type of analysis, and elaboration of empirical materials. Starting with these research objectives, they are never or should never be set before sufficient knowledge of the relevant literature in the field is gathered. This necessarily leads to an accommodation between theories or frameworks for understanding social problems and the objectives of a specific research project. In case the current research in the field does not suit us, then a different form of understanding of the issue should be created, and with it new concepts and theories. All this will also affect the objectives that must reflect this new positioning or vision of the subject. In a different direction, academics tend to settle in a specific theoretical framework and thus usually think of research objectives that somehow fit in with their theories. As an example, think for a moment on an objective like this to analyze the way personal identity is constructed in everyday interaction. The concepts that one can find in these objectives are quite clear about the theory behind, namely a theory of identity formation in social interaction. And this objective would be at odds with an essentialist view of identity, where innate personality or psychological characteristics determine what we are. Something similar could be said about the relation between type of analysis and objectives. While it is quite common to state that the methodology should fit the research objectives, it is much uncommon to state this specific relation. Objectives somehow indicate the type of analysis that would fit best. In the previous example, I would think that a discourse analytic approach or a narrative analysis could better serve the stated objective. Finally, the elaboration of research materials can lead to discover something unexpected and thus open the way to a different line of research with new objectives. Different theoretical frameworks unavoidably have epistemological foundation that may be very different from one and from the other. The assumptions on society and individual self as a start may differ greatly. Thus, it is difficult to think that any approach to test analysis will serve any theoretical perspective. Perhaps the most relevant divide when it comes to qualitative research would be the following. Regarding the first one, realistic versus constructivist perspective, some analytical schools in general can be divided between those that take clearly a realistic position versus others that stand in a constructivist stance. In this sense, constructivist approaches are better served by discourse analysis that can account for the constructed character of the social and how reality is constructed in the text one analyzes. On the contrary, realistic approaches need forms of analysis that are compatible with the assigning of objective materiality to the things informants talk about, much like grounded theory does. If we do not go without saying that some forms of analysis try to establish a compromise between these two positions. For instance, discursive perspective trying to account for social differences and power relations, or some grounded theory approaches that go constructivist, as you know. But they both maintain clear links to their respective origins in general. For the second divide, forms of content analysis share a common informational approach to texts that emphasize objectivity and transparency in the treatment of empirical materials. This approach willingly avoids any kind of interpretation of the symbolic meanings and thus cannot be useful for constructivist approaches and interactionist approaches, for which grasping the subjective meaning of action is paramount. Regarding the third divide, again, content analysis places itself in a manifest level of analysis. That means not to infer any notion from the texts, what is quite impossible, in fact. On the other hand, structural analysis aims to bring light to what is hidden, what only the expert eye can see, the subjection structure that gives sense to the different texts on the subject. The relation, then, between theory and analysis is clear, but need not be univocal, so to speak. A specific theory could be thought of being compatible with different forms of analysis as long as they share a similar epistemological foundation. For instance, discourse analysis is quite well suited to post-structuralist approaches as much as this is compatible with constructivist theories. In any case, when approaching texts, researchers should make their own theoretical perspective explicit. There is not such a thing as an unbiased, naive approach to test and analysis, like some researchers like to think. In relation with these two elements, a theoretical framework and the treatment of the materials, it can be easily argued that theories and concepts influence what we see in the research materials. Thematic analysis, as a qualitative form of content analysis, look for and logically finds the topics that are tackled in the empirical materials. Interactionist approaches pay attention to the social relations or social interaction one can infer from the texts. Critical discourse analysts and Foucauldian-oriented researchers have no trouble in seeing power structures, ideologies, and the like. Discourse analysts, in their own turn, logically can establish the range of discourses used in a set of texts and how they are used and with what consequences. Structuralist researchers specialize in finding the concealed elements that give sense to the way the texts are constructed. Other kinds of researchers can infer without hesitation cognitive processes, attitudes, and the like. If we view the question in the other direction, different theoretical entities can be found and interpreted in the same texts. Thus, texts can be subjected to different forms of analysis that will lead to different results. And this is, for me, this is a key question, since it's quite compatible to the way I was thinking of my teaching as a CAT teacher, since the thing that the same test can be subjected to different forms of analysis means that every student in my class could find their own way of doing that. See, for instance, the following extract from a focus group on work experiences. I have highlighted some extracts to give you an idea of the main things that they are spoken in this verbatim. This is the situation of this focus group. It was at the beginning of the focus group, and the interviewers in this extract simply was talking about if they did like or they didn't like the work they were performing as in this case computer analysts. My point would be that I could approach this text from many different theories and ways of analysis. And for instance, imagine that I am conducting a research on the elements producing satisfaction in a determined work experience, in this case among computer analysts. I would try then to translate the text into different aspects producing satisfaction or dissatisfaction. For instance, as you see here, being forced to work out of necessity, as you can see here in the second line, doesn't seem very much satisfying, but at least the first informant, likes the task in itself, although the degree of satisfaction in relation to the task seems higher in the second informant. He says, if I didn't have to work, I would also program as a way of computer analysis. But now imagine that I'm conducting a research on the discourses about work among computer analysts. Then I could identify in this tract at least 3 discourses. The discourse of necessity, the discourse of vocation, that way I would relate to this second informant, and the discourse of, let's say, comfort. We could call it comfort, meaning that the job is nice, I enjoy it, but the rest of life is perhaps the rest of the activities I do in my life are more important for me than my work. If this would be my approach in the rest of the groups, I would try to identify this or other discourses along with their condition of use when they appear and how they are employed by the different informants. Well, finally, the way researchers make sense of the empirical materials, either by classifying, codifying, looking for patterns, making annotation, etc., is necessary necessarily dependent on the forms of analysis chosen and more distantly on the theoretical framework. In my opinion, one always needs to use some kind of annotations and classification of verbatim. In other words, I can see how one can avoid the use of these tools of all CALDA's program offer when you are dealing with a considerable amount of empirical materials, be them interviews, focus group, or observation notes. You know that normally in our projects nowadays, we gather a lot of information in many interviews. You know, we find ourselves with several, even up to 50, 60 interviews or a lot of focus group discussion also. But the important question is that the meaning of the levels used for classifying means something different depending on the type of analysis you are carrying out. This is also something that I want to stress strongly. The thing that what is important is that the meaning we give to the levels we use for classifying this strap of the interviews. So the important question is, for me, what do your code names, the names you put to the codes you use, for your type of analysis? Are you thinking of codes that represent discourses? Are you thinking of codes that represent topics of subtopics of your materials? Are they topic in line with thematic analysis, or are they discourses or elements of them, including their condition of use? Or are they categories and properties in line with the way to proceed in grounded theory through constant comparison, actual coding, etc.? School of analysis, of the school every school of analysis also differ in relation to the way codes are to be created. Some schools foster deductive approaches. That means that the eventual codes will somehow derive from theory that will specify the categories needed to organize the materials. The analysis of satisfaction at work that I was talking about before in the verbatim could be an example of this, since the available literature clearly establishes what makes work experience satisfactory or not. There's a kind of list of things or aspects that influence that has been researched that tell us what are the dimensions that produce satisfaction or dissatisfaction in the work experience. Other schools advocate for inductive approaches where codes are created directly from data, avoiding as much as possible theoretical conditioning. A third way would be an adaptive approach in which the coding is established in a movement to and fro between theory and empirical materials. Well, I go around to conclusions. I hope to have persuaded by now, or at least aroused your interest of precisely the interest of the notion of the magic square and how the interrelation among these four elements should guide the research project. To conclude this talk, I would like to stress some questions and extract two corollaries. First, I emphasize the importance on thinking about theories and concepts as a kind of mediation that orient what we see in the texts. Second, the importance of pondering on thinking over the epistemological foundation of our theories and concepts, since they are related to our ways of analysis. Third, there is not one or only one good way of using calculus. Our own use must simply be in line with our school of analysis and our theories, and this is also an important claim for me. Finally, the two corollaries would be, one, the importance of thinking over and developing one's own way of analysis and using calculus. Even you may rely on the experience of other researchers. The second corollary would be that you may have noticed my preference over some forms of analysis versus others. I won't deny it, and it is impossible not to have certain preferences. However, my experience as a researcher, but also as a reader of many qualitative research results in books and articles, have led me to think that it is possible to produce interesting results under every form of analysis when it is carried out in a sensitive and knowledgeable way. Let's finish then with this vindication of qualitative research as an honest and sound way of producing interesting understanding about society. Many thanks for your attention. Perhaps it was a bit short, but I was a bit fast in explaining all to you. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we have more time for the discussion, so it's interesting too. Anyone who wants to ask a question? Okay, please, colleagues with the micros. Yes. Raquel is.
Thank you very much, Prof, for this nice presentation. I'm starting to like this magic square. Prof, my question is on the theory box. So if one is following the Glasserian approach, grounded theory, how will it work out?
The sound is not clear. Could you please?
Okay, I'm asking if one is using grounded theory, when you start, you don't have a theory to start with, how will this magic square work out?
¿Cómo funcionaría si tú usas la teoría fundamental?
You know, well, I'm not an expert myself in grounded theory, but I'm very, I have read a lot about it. I have not yet, let's say, performed grounded theory, so perhaps I know the best person to answer this question. What I think is important in grounded theory, what I like most about grounded theory is its emphasis on building or working from the meaning of people. But this is an approach that other approaches to analysis have also, share also with this grounded theory. What I don't like very much is that when the grounded theory goes very almost positivist in a stance, you know, it's the thing that you have to build theory in a most objective way, okay? So it doesn't seem sometimes for grounded theory analysts that you are working with meaning. And as I told you before, I have been, I'm quite close to grounded theory in a sense that I studied a lot about symbolic interactionism from the start of my career, and it is quite dear to me. But my understanding, or the understanding I received from this kind of theory, was more interpretive. You are working with meaning. You are working with how people understand their own ways, and this is quite compatible with this, let's say, emic orientation of grounding theory. The thing that you work or you build from people, from the people, meaning to the experiences. But finally, the way grounded theory works leaves aside this subjective construction of meaning of people, and they emphasize so much the thing of building theory that this building theory is kind of something that is real, that is not to be interpreted. I don't know if I'm clear enough, but it would be my position on grounded theory. Even though I have read, as I said before, I have read many studies, reports made with grounded theory, and I found them you know, very interesting, because, you know, the results, when you work or you analyze in a sensitive and thorough way, you know, the result could be interesting even if you don't share very much the foundation, okay?
Perfect. So thank you so much for your presentation and presenting us and introducing the idea of the magic square. I wondered, in comparison to the linear approach, which I definitely reject, I wonder how your magic square helps me to better navigate from the different parts back and forth. Do you have, like, from your experience and the conceptual idea, something you could share on the movement between the different phases? Because in your presentation, in the end, it was a step 1, step 2, 3, and 4, right? But I guess you meant something different, so maybe you can clarify on that. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Thank you for your question too. I was not, perhaps I have given that impression of step 1, step 2. What I want is to share with you is my experience about how all these 4 elements are somehow interrelated in different moments of the research project. I have tried to, you know, to put in every relationship between each of the each two elements, to put all my experience on that, all what I could be of interest to you for this presentation. I don't think of it as a, you know, as a process. Exactly, you know, we all have studied methodology, and we all have studied methodology as a process. So that you can find in handbooks, and it is nice it is correct to learn it, or to start learning like this, you know. But once you have experience and once you have been working as a researcher, I guess you have also noticed that the process is not so clear. You do never start with objectives. You start with theory, you start with the revision of the literature, you start with thinking of what am I able to analyze this kind of objective, or would I rather align my objective with something that I can analyze and I feel able to analyze. That would be, you know, the change of let's say vision of the process. Okay, in this sense, I wouldn't want it. I hope I wouldn't give the impression that it was that I was also presenting, you know, a series of steps we follow. But rather, I would think of it as a process of reflexivity, in the sense that all these 4 elements has to be somehow connected and reflexively thought during the whole process, during the whole research process. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I really like the concept of the magic square. At first I was thinking maybe it was going to come from mathematics, which would have made it quite exciting for me as well. But it was exciting in the way that you're making connections between really important aspects of research, research design, but also methodology. And it reminded me of 2 things that I use in my own teaching. The first is from Maxwell for research design, and Maxwell's diagram with research questions in the middle. We've got validity, methods of analysis, goals, literature. And of course, you're looking at analysis particularly. And then the other thing I use, which this reminded me of, but I like the square better, is Crotty's approach from Foundation of Knowledge, where it starts with the epistemology, then goes to the theory, then to analysis methods. Everything must align, methods, and we go backwards and forwards. So I thought the square works is nicer in a sense that you can have that reflective element going between as a visual rather than Crotty, because Crotty's does look linear. And yeah, so mine's more of a comment, but thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Yeah, I insist that for undergraduate students, I think methodology should be explained as a linear process. I think otherwise you won't see the logic of the whole thing. But finally, I'm glad you shared this reference with me. The process is more, let's say, interrelated, complex, and in this sense, I guess you might agree with me in this sense, in the sense that even in your first project, you never start from scratch, let's say. You already have some theories in mind, you already have some knowledge of the literature, so finally you mix all together in a kind of bowl and produce something out of it. And what you produce is objectives and theories, forms analysis, and with that the final result. So in this sense, thank you for your comment and for your references. It could be that are very interesting for me too.
Hi, I hope that's working now. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really like the magic square. I can echo the comments from other people. I see it as a really nice example of rigor in qualitative methods. And my question is, well, a lot of my colleagues, I'm in a psychology department. We've got a lot of statisticians, and they do not value qualitative research methods whatsoever. They think it's just a chat, and I make up the results at the end, and it's just, flight of fancy. So I suppose my question is, from your experience, I know it's a big question maybe. Do you have any words of wisdom to help encourage that idea of rigor and using these frameworks and reflexivity and showing people that your work is valuable and it has a process? I suppose, it's just a question of getting that process across to others, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Well, I work in the area of social psychology, although I'm a sociologist as a training, and that's why I feel very close to your question. Thanks for it. And we in psychology in general, also in social psychology, there is a line of research that still thinks about the interest of the need of being more mathematical than even the earth sciences or biology or medicine. No, you have to be more scientific than the hard sciences. Let's say. It's difficult for me because I still find this question in many people. You know, I don't go to social psychology congresses in Spain because they really don't value qualitative research in general. Sometimes they go, not very often. But if I have to discuss with people with quantitative social psychologists, for instance, I would say that I would try to unveil the way their work finally rely on language interpretation. For instance, many of my colleagues in social psychology work with scales, you know, a scale of whatever, work satisfaction, a scale of anxiety, a scale of you know, cognitive, emotional regulation, for instance. They work with scales. What are scales but a series of items that has meaning, and you, with some kind of exoteric way of, mathematical way of producing results, you come to think that this scale is reliable. But are we really sure? How do we construct our scale? How do we make sense of the meanings of the responses to the scale? You know, in fact, that is, let's say, the black box, to use a different metaphor. You know, when we are criticized as qualitative researchers, these positivist approaches. What they say is that our results are absolutely subjective and dependent on our interpretation. That because between the results, our text and our results, there is a kind of black box. But and they don't have that. When they get the numbers, the results are quite clear-cut. But what they don't realize, and they don't like to acknowledge, is that their black box is before the construction of whatever technique they're using. How do we construct a scale or whatever other one experiment? It finally depends on an interpretation of the situation of the items that you put into the thing. So, that would be my strategy to counteract these quantitative claims of our non-scientific ways.
I wanted to continue the excellent question raised. Thank you. I think you're speaking on behalf of many of our experiences by saying there's actually been interesting scholarship. There's a paper that came out in 2023. It's called Reflexivity in Quantitative Research, a rationale and a beginner's guide. And I've often used that paper to start conversations with my colleagues. I also wanted to ask and maybe press you a little bit further, because some of the questions earlier about, fit and how do we correct for fit, you sort of pivoted a little bit more towards, this is something we first have to teach people new to qualitative research methods and then slowly take them along. But how would you, use this sort of guidance like the Magic Square with maybe our more senior colleagues? At least, and I think we both have been in the experience that also really excellent papers I get to review as a reviewer kind of suffer from problems that not just the junior folks struggle and grapple with. So can you think of creative ways in which we can also use this and ultimately make our own process as qualitative researchers more transparent? Maybe also think a little bit more radical beyond just the traditional papers, or what can journals and publishers do? Because I think we all have a say in that too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your question. You must not think that I explain all this in my classes when I teach, analysis through CAGDAS, Atlas TI in general. But what I really do, what I try to tell my students is that one of the things that I have told you about. That is that they must construct the identity of researchers. What kind of researcher am I? I am a discourse analyst. I am a grounded theorist. Do I prefer to do thematic analysis, for instance? What is the kind of analysis I feel more comfortable with? You know, it is, and for younger researchers, it is quite a challenge. You know, because they are still on the process of training. They are unsure about how to proceed with my text, with the materials that I've gathered for my research. But I still think that it is an exercise worth taking, or worth making the effort to proceed in that way, because that you will have that, or you will how to say that. That will come with you for the rest of your career, so to speak. You know, once you start, once you construct yourself as a specific kind of researcher, that will come with you for the rest of your trajectory. It's not so easy or so common to change from being a content analyst to a discourse analyst. It's not so common. So when you start with a certain tradition, you have done the effort to get acquainted with all these theories, ways of analysis. You do it once, and then it will be with you for the rest of your life. With my senior colleagues, you must understand that I don't try to change their ways of analyzing. It would be stupid, you know. They are expert researchers. They have published a lot. They have researched a lot. All I can do with them, the only way I can help them is that if they use Cactus, their work could be easier. They could use the tool of Cactus in a way that could ease the time they put on analysis. And I try to persuade them that they can use them, or they can flexibly use Cactus to fit with their way of analyzing. I don't know, and sometimes I am successful with that. Sometimes I persuade them to do that, and sometimes I don't. There are many, not quite a few researchers that are quite reluctant to use Cactus, and they still are. Not because they don't have the knowledge of the tool. They find the tool difficult or impossible of learning. That's simply because they don't think that that Cactus could contribute something to their way of analyzing, even to improve the times they put on analysis. You know, I don't know if I've answered all your things.
We have time for one more question, I think. Not very long, but if no one has, then I have one. I try to be short. It's good that you started as a good qualitative researcher. You started talking about your position as a researcher and how you develop as a researcher and your background. So, and you have lived this change from using like the paper analysis to Cactus. Nowadays, we are facing the artificial intelligence challenge that is getting not only into the Cactus itself, but also in the process in general. So how, briefly, what is your opinion about that as a researcher?
Well, my opinion is very negative. I mean, I have I have tried to use the tools that especially Atlas TI offer for research, and I don't think it's really make a good, it's not helpful at all. I don't see how these tools can help my way of analyzing, my way of doing analysis. If you use the coding, artificial intelligence coding, the codes they provide are, has absolutely no sense for me. It wouldn't be similar to anything that I would find interesting of making a contribution to your results. I don't see that. I'm not, in general, AI is a way of producing text, generative AI, that does not really understand the content of what they are doing. So if we as qualitative researchers are struggling with interpretation, with the interpretation of the text that has a lot of meanings, it is sometimes difficult to agree with what it is connoted or denoted in the text. How can an artificial intelligence that does not understand anything that it is on that text could produce something of value? Perhaps I'm getting old, which is also true, but for the time being, I don't see how these tools can be of use for us as qualitative researchers. It is also true that it provides with a strong temptation to use text in a quantitative way, because all these tools, even characters in general, makes easier to produce numbers out of texts. I always advise my students against that, because if you work with numbers, you are not doing qualitative research anymore. If you want to stay qualitative in your research, you don't need, and you should rather avoid this kind of quantification. In the case what you want to do is some kind of quantitative content analysis, it is quite legitimate, but then you are not doing qualitative research. You are doing something different. You are not in this congress, so to speak. So that would be, I say.
Okay, thank you very much. So before we finish, we would like to give you a gift from the organization.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you much for attention. Really, it's been a pleasure, and thanks for your interesting question. I hope you have enjoyed the talk.
Okay, thank you everybody so much.